and you don't cry and I don't lose my temper. Like we
Yeah.
both, maybe
Yeah.
I'll move that over there. And yet somehow, there's one of the things I've thought about a lot is like there's a lack of critical distance.
Yeah.
In being able to look at your work.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like, you know, if everyone had a great dramaturg, you know, maybe there would be.
Well, that's sort of
because that's a theater editor, you know,
Right.
but like so few people. I don't know. It's, you know, like not every big production or theater has them or can pay for them or even really knows what they are or like, and also I don't know. I mean, like, I think it's also tricky because I feel like in journalism, you don't go and pick your editor. You're assigned to an editor who has a professional relationship with you. In theater, as is the case about a lot of things, I mean, I think it's like, again, like these coins, right, where like a good thing is the flip side of a bad thing, right? Like, it's a good thing that there are these like intimate, fascinating, like collaborations that grow and get really fruitful, and like the flip side of that is that like you can go and pick your best friend as a dramaturg and like just have beers and talk about the play and never be rigorous, you know, and you lose like the fact that person should be an editor of, you know, like the analog to an editor, and they become like a support system instead. So yeah.
So is that sort of where is that the space between the two?
I don't feel like it is. I mean, like, it's interesting, right? Because, like, at YSD, it's the Department of Dramaturgy and Dramatic Criticism, right? And, like, I know that when I got hired, a lot of dramaturgs were like, what? Yeah, I mean, I do feel like and I believe, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I said director instead of dramaturg, when I was like, the crossover with the way a critic thinks, partially just because I think that out of necessity, but whatever. I believe that the best directors are also just like undercover really great dramaturgs, you know, like I think that you have to be a pretty excellent dramaturg as a director, and then like you're just, I mean, then not that then you don't need one, because like another living being who sees something differently is always really useful, but I feel like you have to have those like those same tendencies. So going back to like, I don't know how something might actually work, I guess, I mean, yeah, like, for one thing, I think it would be cool to introduce the idea of, I don't know, you know, even if it's literally just like sitting around in a circle and like having, some version of these like conversations that we used to have in practicum, you know, like with people who are in the early stages, partly because like that's actually, well, I mean, like, as you know, we're saying, it's like that's where feedback can be of like a tangible use on the thing itself. Like, I feel like one of the problems with, I mean, I know why so many artists don't read reviews. I mean, there are 1 million reasons not to read most reviews, but like, I know why plenty of artists don't read even reviews by people that they're like, oh, well, I don't, you know, like, I respect that person, or I don't hate that person, or whatever. And I think it's like partially because it just feels so futile, right? It's like the thing is done. Like, and maybe like I don't, like, I wish it weren't done, but it's done, you know? And like, and especially with new plays, it's, I mean, if it were me, I'd be like, I hope to Jesus I don't have to go back and do that again. Like, but like, you know, I mean, like, when I was doing this Macbeth recently, I mean, I had that sort of, perennial frustration, right, of like the lovely artistic director who's wonderful and super smart and a dramaturg, coming in on like, our literal dress rehearsal and being like, this is so great. I also have like these 50 pages of thoughts or whatever. And I was like, okay, for one thing, they're all 16. They like can barely remember to do the things I'm telling them to do. This is probably not going to get implemented this time. But also it's that tradition. It's just, like it's such a tradition of like the artistic director swooping in and giving you these kind of unimplementable notes at the 11th hour. It's like a little bit less, in a sort of philosophical way, frustrating when you're working on something like Shakespeare, because you can kind of put them in your back pocket and be like, I may always come back to Macbeth, like I may always come back to Hamlet or whatever, and like I will maybe be able to take these things forward with me, but that like seems so impossible to do in the way that most work is just presented.
So what would you have liked, again, in a fictitious universe?
Yeah.
What would you like the artistic director? How would you like that dialogue to go?
I mean, I feel like I'd love for them to show up earlier in the process. I don't know. Well, I mean, put it this way. If it's still to be a pretty conventional, a pretty conventionally set up process in terms of how it's being rehearsed and the timing of design and like all that stuff. I feel like I would at least like that person to show up at the very first stumble through. Like the first time that it's like, okay, we've like put it all together and it's super rough. Because like I want to have a conversation about, because at least in the way I work, I really like to try to get things, I try not to work in sort of in kind of like linear huge detail, so that like we've only touched the end 2 days before we open or whatever. It's like I try to like do a sketch and then like do another, so it's like for me, I try to get to a place of like being able to do the whole thing on its feet like kind of early. And like if the person could actually show up at that point, I feel like a lot of, no matter how many big holes there are in it, it's like I think that probably most of like my kind of big ideas with a capital BI would be like apparent at that point. And that would be the point that like talking about those big ideas would still be like that, like some elasticity would still exist, I think, because then you're like going back in to like re-sketch. I mean, I don't know, like it'd be nice for the person to appear, I would say like ideally it would be like minimum 3 times, right? Like sort of that like early stumble, like a sort of midpoint, and then also like the end. But then hopefully like the end is, I don't know, like, the thing's never going to be perfect, but hopefully then the end isn't sort of this like, doesn't feel like this kind of it feels like the natural progression of an ongoing conversation. I've like thought a lot, I mean like, so before grad school, I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is where I'm from, and I was at this theater, which like, it's a really interesting, strange theater, because it started as like this total like little community theater in the 90s, and it kind of like built itself up into being, I mean, it still is a community theater, but like I want somebody to do like a study of it, because it's such a strange like hybrid beast. Like it's got 2 stages. People are super invested in it. It almost functions like a baby regional, but it's still just a big community theater. It's got a ton of dysfunction, but it's like very loved. Anyway, I was there, and there was a season where they lost their artistic. It's called Live Arts. It's really an interesting place. I mean, like there's tons that's, ridiculous about it. I was there a season that they lost their artistic director, and it was the guy that they'd had, who had founded them back in the beginning, and the board lost their shit, and everybody, was this sort of, and they were sort of, basically what happened was that I became the interim, but they were like too nervous to call me the interim, so I had some stupid title that was like, Sarah's doing all these tasks that we don't want to call the interim artistic director, until they found somebody. But like suddenly I was thrown into the role of like going to these things and giving people notes.